Humankind has long had a thirst for knowledge, ever expanding their civilizations through exploration and the search for new lands, with an unbridled curiosity toward understanding the unknown. The existence of ancient cultures has always given rise to legends, some true and some unfounded, that have fueled the need to discover the truth. Personally, I am enamored by the search for meaning, whether sourced from rumors or not, of places and ways of living that may have existed beyond the reach of time, in ages long forgotten and barely spoken of. Which is why, as a kid, video games gave me such a reprieve from reality, placing me into situations where I didn't know anything about the world, its characters, or its legends, and was just expected to figure it out for myself, sans modern-day internet. Perhaps one of the most endearing elements of today's game, Illusion of Time, also known as Illusion of Gaia in the Americas, is that it places us into a reflection of our own world, in an age of discovery when technology is starting to rise to prominence. Ideas and concepts, such as that of flight, which may have been only a passing fancy, were able to be realized. Imagine having a love who had set sail on a dangerous sea, and you weren't sure that you were ever going to see them again. Then BAM! Suddenly planes exist and the boundaries that once separated our strange, alien societies are immediately broken down and open for all to experience. Developed by Quintet and published by Enix in Japan in 1993, and North America and PAL Territories by Nintendo in 1994 and 1995 for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, Illusion of Time presents a glimmer of a world that could very well be our own, if you squinted hard enough. As a kid, I loved the hell out of this game. It was one of the most played titles that I owned because it really invigorated my imagination and had me questioning and exploring the morality of my own actions and how I lived my life. I think it is so profound that a game could do that to me, and I'd even named my two hermit crabs after Will and Kara. I would have been around 10 or 11 years old when I first played the game, so coming back to it now as an adult nearing his 40s, I was hoping to examine it through a different lens, without the unabashed curiosity of a child, and in its place, the wealth of experience of being a functioning adult. What I discovered was very different to what I experienced as a child, so let me tell you a little bit about my experience of playing Illusion of Time long after the memories of youth have faded. Before we begin the review in detail, I wanted to first touch on the themes that are generally inherent within most games produced by Quintet, that of evolution, reincarnation, and the enduring presence of hope. The games also present issues of morality that make you, as the player, question how you perceive the world and the limit to which you will accept some of the disagreeable actions of others. For example, in one point of the narrative, one character states that it is not right to consume the life of a fish in order to sustain one's own existence, even if you are dying of hunger, which feeds into the concept of the entitlement of the human race in its unsatiated need to expand and grow, encroaching on land that once belonged to creatures that are now long extinct. I feel like Terranigma, the next game in the series, covered some of these themes better, though you do need to be mindful that they are also very present here, and observe it as a commentary on society, rather than that of the game preaching for you to adjust your own lifestyle, else you might find yourself not enjoying the game at all. In this semblance of a dream, the fleeting telling echoing away like the crisp flakes of dust falling from the eyelashes as one comes back to reality, we play the role of Will. Will is a young man living with his grandparents in the small town of South Cape, a settlement governed by the neighbouring Edward Castle. He is the son of an explorer who disappeared in an expedition to the Tower of Babel, a trip that Will himself had been present at, but bears no memory of. Passing his days quietly with his friends, they learn together at a local church and hang out in a secret beach cave after school. Whilst Will's friends are unremarkable, Will himself has the ability of telekinesis with a hint of precognition, abilities that his friends enjoy seeing him perform. One day, the group learns that the princess of the nearby castle has run away, and Will returns home to find an unknown girl conversing with his grandparents. Whilst at first she lies about her identity, it's later discovered that she is the very same absconded daughter of King Edward when knights arrive to forcefully return her home. The next day, Will receives a letter from the king inviting him to bring a crystal ring that belonged to Ullman, Will's father. With such an auspicious invitation, he can hardly say no, hurrying to the castle to meet the member of royalty. Though ever does greed permeate humanity, as the king becomes angered when Will fails to present the requested item, and tosses him into the dungeon. Whilst I have mentioned before that Will's friends are unremarkable and probably would have rotted until they became a corpse, much like our dear skeletal friends that wander the dank premises, Will is a lot more resourceful and luckily did not have his belongings taken from him when he was locked up. After Kara's pig Hamlet comes to save his bacon with a key and a letter from the princess outlining how she too is a prisoner, Will can begin to battle his way out. The king has kept some nefarious company in the form of bats and skeletons and weird projectile-throwing slimy green tentacles that Will must dispatch to win free of his confinement. With no weapon handy, Will relies on the sturdiness of his flute, a tool that can displace enemy organs just as well as it can win the hearts of listeners, from breath spent blown delicately through his moist lips to the warm humming pipe. When using the flute to defeat enemies, Will makes an overhead lunge, which does not have a lot of range, though he can press the attack further with a lunging thrust. Whilst there is not a lot of versatility in his moveset early on, Will can learn new skills as the story progresses by visiting Gaia in the Dark Space. Dark Space exists as a pocket dimension unaffected by the flow of time. Here, Will can record his progress as well as learn two separate transformations: the Dark Knight Frieden, whose physical power alone outranks Will's, and the ethereal form of Shadow, a creature said to be linked to a comet that is currently heading toward Earth, boding an ill omen. Character progression is entirely linear, as is the narrative, with Will learning new skills and abilities as the need arises, meaning that you need to become good at the game if you want to be able to survive its dangers. The only grinding that exists per se is the absolute slaughter of every single enemy on each dungeon screen. Accomplishing this will reward Will with a permanent stat boost to either his attack, defense, or HP. I thought this was a nice way to handle leveling and encouraged use of the in-game map to explore every nook and cranny of hostile locations. As Will explores these places, he can pick up dark gems, which stack in lots of 99. Each 99 stack represents an opportunity to continue from near where you died upon defeat, albeit with a little less health than you started with. Healing items are extremely limited and cannot be bought, so you need to be careful that you are approaching every dangerous situation with a level head and a strategy, otherwise you may find yourself unable to beat the game due to a lack of restoratives. Whilst Illusion of Time takes Will from a version of South America and across the ocean to Europe and Asia on a very linear track, it's important to note that with few exceptions you cannot backtrack. I didn't mind this as a kid, but it does mean that if you want to complete the side quest to get every red jewel, it's nearly impossible if you don't know where to look, as some of them are hidden in the most obtuse of places. One such you trigger by entering and exiting the seaside cave in South Cape until a fisherman is sitting on the docks just outside. Short of using the instruction manual that blatantly tells you where all of these items are, I'd be surprised if anyone could find them all by themselves. Additionally, some of the issues that the game tries to tackle I felt were not done in a considered way, especially the theme of slavery. It's basically introduced as "this is bad" without much exposition, and being children themselves, Will and friends aren't equipped with the skills to even be able to comprehend how they could possibly assist. As a child, when I played this game, I thought it was sad that these people were being forced into duty, not considering that the act lacked their consent and robbed them of their agency. Even as an adult, when rescuing the children from the diamond mine, I had to consider, what were they going to do now? They were children in a foreign land whose skin tone did not match that of the locals. Were they now going to starve and die due to lack of experience surviving in the wild? Or were they going to be recaptured, meaning that Will's efforts to free them were for nothing? I think it would have been nice if maybe Will met a smuggler that could return the children back to their native home, rather than what we were delivered with. However, this theme takes a backseat to the main narrative, so would easily get a pass if you were playing as a child, who didn't have the broad knowledge of the world or its sordid history. The localization also probably gets a pass from a child, which is a shame as the game has a lot of potential, but characterizes some of the cast in a weird way, and the choice of words and delivery of them was just a little bit off. I didn't notice this as a kid, but it was glaring as an adult. It's definitely an element of its time, with some contemporaries before and even after also suffered the same fate. In his travels, Will must search for 6 statues that he will be asked to take to the Tower of Babel. These are all located in ruins that are based on real-world locations, and I enjoyed this aspect immensely. From chasing the rumour of the Incan gold ship to wandering the sky gardens floating high above the Nazca Desert, world ruin aficionados will be in for a treat. Some of these locations will require the use of new abilities and skills for Will and his transformations, such as sending a blast of enemy from the tip of Frieden's blade, or sinking through the floor as Shadow. My favourite ability would have to be Will's Psycho Slider, which can not only be used to glide through small openings, but also to defeat enemies. When Will enters this stance, he is completely impervious to enemy attacks and can hit enemies multiple times whilst in the animation. It made killing some of the more difficult enemies a breeze. My least favourite was the spin dash. It's cumbersome to execute, and the instructions that Gaia give you aren't helpful, so I spent a bit of time scratching my head wondering if I was even doing it correctly. Will also needs to be able to build momentum to use this skill effectively, so if there's a long stretch of ramps, he won't be getting up them without enough of a run up. I almost died in the pyramid because of this. The last thing I really wanted to note about the game's design is that there are two types of dungeon. There are the free roam ones that allow diverse exploration supporting light puzzle elements, where the other is structured more like a standard Castlevania title, with corridors spanning left and right and stairways in the background to take you between the levels. The latter style tended to be tedious and uninteresting, and I always found myself feeling relieved when they were over. Sadly, there are more than a couple of them. Just as limiting as these dungeons is the inventory, which is very easy to fill up without really meaning to, especially if you are trying to conserve herbs. Ultimately though, if you are efficient and considered about returning red jewels to Gem the Jeweler, then you shouldn't have to worry too much about this. I love the way the game is displayed, favouring larger characters as opposed to contemporaries that went with smaller sprites, meaning that more detail could be shown with the larger images. Even simple things like Will's hair blowing in the wind, which plays into a couple of puzzles, was a nice touch. When characters are talking, they are designated a text colour, which makes it easier to follow the dialogue. The monsters are diverse in their variety, and there are no palette swaps, which always gave me something nice to look forward to. Bosses are all big and imposing, and set a sense of dread when coming up against them. Doubly so when you realise you need to run a gambit back to back against all of them toward the end of the game, but I digress. The OST, which comprises of only 29 tracks, was composed by Yasuhiro Kawasaki, who is credited against many other titles that sadly never made it out of Japan. His angle for this soundtrack is mystic and haunting, which comes through in places of worship of old, long-dead tribes and peoples. My favourite track would have to be Royal Anthem, which only plays at Edward Castle. The theme speaks of the power of the royal family, and the pompous nature of their ancestry, which is slowly waning as the world moves toward an age of discovery and expansion. The track kinda reminded me of the theme of Guardia Castle from Chrono Trigger, which may also be why I like it so much. I also liked how the character dialogue would be narrated by sound cues of different pitch, denoting who's speaking, with a higher one for Kara and a lower one for Will, as an example. Illusion of Time took me around 12 hours to beat, which really surprised me as I don't recall it being that short from when I played it as a kid. Coming back to play it as an adult, there were certainly flaws that cracked the rose-coloured spectacles, such as the way the dialogue was written, as well as the poorly made attempt to tackle the issue of slavery. However, despite this, the linear narrative was refreshing amidst games these days that expect you to explore large open areas and tantalisingly place points of interest that ultimately distract from the trajectory of the story, breaking its pace. If you're looking for a tight action title that stays on track, then I would recommend you pick up Illusion of Time. Overall, I enjoyed my time with it, and feel that everyone should experience it at least once. Who knows what you'll discover deep in the ruins of old. By the way, do you tend to prefer games that are narratively driven in a linear fashion, or open world experiences? Let me know in the comments. This has been Venwa with a review of Illusion of Time for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. If you enjoyed this review, please feel free to like and subscribe for more great action RPG content. As always, thank you for taking the time to watch my video. I appreciate you, take care, and bye bye for now.